This is a Devar Torah on Parshas Shoftim, the fifth Parsha in Sefer Devarim, and it is dealing with more issues of the community than, though there's some aspects of dealing with individuals, but it's mainly dealing with the administration of justice, observing Hashem's mitzvahs, worshiping Hashem and not other individuals. It opens with talking about appointing judges and officers, in other words, people who enforce the laws of the courts. And it goes into the thing, you should not pervert justice. You should not accept a bribe. The bribe will blind the eyes. And then it talks about how tzedek, how you pursue it. I'll be going into more detail on these first few verses a little later. It then goes on to that offerings to Hashem must be perfect, not blemished. And it then talks about people worshiping idols, how they have to be punished, and they have to be punished in testimony of two witnesses. It then goes into the description how if there's disputes locally, which means lack of peace, how they have to go to the Sanhedrin, the ultimate court of justice, which is next to the temple, so it could always remember what its job was and who they're serving. And it says you must, and whatever the judges are that they tell you, you cannot go from look to the right or to the left. And anybody who has done a capital offense, it's not being done, very interestingly, the Chumash says, not for the purposes of retribution or revenge, as is left, unfortunately, the capital punishment since then, but it's being done to put fear into the people. But it was never intended to be a method of retribution or punishment. And we see that in the time of the first temple, when adultery became a lot more common. The Sanhedrin moved away from being next to the temple, because that's the only place where you can impose capital punishment, because the intention was never for punishment, but for deterrence. And it then talks about the Judah says you'll want a king appointed over you, not for the right reason, but what do you want a king for? You want a king for administration. You want a king because the other nations have it. You want to emulate the foreign countries. It then says he must be B'nai Israel, can't be from another nation, and he shouldn't multiply horses, because that means going back to Egypt. You shouldn't make gold, silver, and you shouldn't have too many wives, because that would also distract him. Number a king could have was 18. And who sits on the throne, he shall write two Sefer Torah, scrolls of the Torah, and he should read from them all the days for Hashem. In other words, not only they serve Hashem, so they'll have many years ruling a kingdom. It then goes on to talk about how you have to be generous to the Kohanim and Leviim, because they do not have a share of the land like the other tribes. And again, there is practice talking one should not to practice idol worship. And if there is a prophet, he has to be a true prophet. If he doesn't, that prophet needs to die, false prophet. And it then talks about the cities of refuge. Somebody negligently kills somebody, and it goes into descriptions, but he goes to the Ori Miklat, cities of refuge. But if the purpose of the person is a deliberate murderer, he did it for intention of evil, he shall be killed again. There's something for deterrence and also to maintain shalom between peoples and country. And it's another mitzvah that you should not move a boundary of your fellow, because if there's no right of land and your home is taken from you, it will be disastrous. And it also talks about the false witnesses. If false witnesses testify in either capital offenses or monetary offenses, monetary issues against somebody falsely, then whatever they were going to do to the accused or the defendant will be done to them. It then goes into rules of battle, and it exempts certain people. Somebody who's built a new house, not lived in it, has not been with his wife, not planted a vineyard, and all of these he's exempt. Now these were wars of expansion beyond the land of Eretz Israel, the land of the Canaanite nations. In the other ones, they had to be working behind the lines, doing what we call quartermaster tasks today. They also go into rules of war, that you let the nation surrender. If they're willing to surrender, you'll occupy them and you let them live. But none of those that resist, those cities can be destroyed. And there's an interesting rule that talking about conservation of nature, that in making siege equipment, they could not cut down fruit trees. Then it continues with a law: if a dead body is found between two cities, murdered, the elders of the two cities, they had to measure which one was closer. Then what they did is they took the they had a heifer that was neck was broken, and they washed their hands in the wash their hands over it and say that our hands have not spilled blood, and because the land by its nature cannot accept murder at all, and that is how the Parsha ends. Now, I'd like to focus on a few of the verses here at the beginning. And the first verse of the Parsha has an interesting wording. Beyond the meaning of appointing non-corruptible judges and administering justice fairly, it says, Shoftim v'shtarim tin laka b'kol shereka asher Adonai Elokeka noten lak shivitim shifto et am amishpat tzedek. Justices and officers you shall appoint in all your cities, which God gives you for your tribes, and they should judge the people with righteous judgment. Now, if you look at the wording, it starts in a singular. It says, "Shoftim shetatin lacha." You should appoint in b'kol shereka, in every one of your gate. Now, since they're talking about 12 tribes, talking about all the people of Israel, why are they talking in the singular He could have said Shirachim, Sharaim, your gates in the plural, because there's more than one city. And there's a number of explanations. The one I would like to share is that brought in the Sefer Lakutim, and as is explained by the Arizal, why do you use the word Sharechem, the plural? And there's a very important thing to be understood here, that there's a remez, there's an important remez beyond the obvious meaning, that it's talking about not the judges here, or the tribes, it's talking about each one of us as an individual. It's a remez to call v'chad Israel. You have has many gates. We as an individual have many gates. Elohim, Sharei Otzvei Einayim is what they see with their eyes. Shar Mashma Hu Ba'aznayim, what you hear with your ears. Shar Dibu Hu Peh, words what you say with you speak with your mouth. Sharei Reach Hu Af, you smell with your nose. Shari Mishimush Haim Biyadayim Meraglayim, and the shar where you do activities with your hands and feet, right? So in Cain, what does this mean that a man needs to have Shoftim and Shtarim? What does it mean he has to have a judges and court officers? And Koilu Sharim in this court, why do they say that? Because what he has to do is make Gidorim, getters, fences for himself, for herself. So they're not going to come to matters of ereva, immorality. And not get involved in things that are not appropriate to them. And they shouldn't speak nivul pair, which means bad or low language, and not rechilas, which they should, which means rechilas is one of the forms of evil speech, where one person goes to, let's say, Ruvain and says to him, you know what Shimon's saying about you? To cause machlokus. And then he'll go to Shimon and say, you know, Ruvain's mad at you. And he was the whole cause of that. And which is even worse than speaking falsely about somebody or even saying true things that could hurt him, though they're all evil types of speech. And lo rex bisamim shel ereva, in other words, types of incense that were used for inappropriate activities and idol worship, and that they shouldn't be conducting immorality, and you shouldn't come to speak words of avera, or go to carnivals and circus, not like today. In the ancient times, those were even recently, not so long ago, they were places of immorality in any appropriate sites. And therefore, Yoreka means Lashon Yakid. It's a remez to all of that you have to make fences to keep you from Gedor Sharim, make gates to protect you from hate, fences for the gates. And if you don't do that, your gates are going to be open and the enemies are going to be able to get you. This is Mida Keneged Mida. In other words, if we didn't do the right thing, we'll eventually be conquered. But if we don't, in other words, we must do tzedek and tzaddik, and we'll give, and we all have gates, and we all need to protect them and take care of it. And it's not only applying to this world, it's applying to the next world, because it says from here, this world, until the Rakia, the heavens, the higher worlds, right? There were all kinds of ones that would want to kill you, forces want to kill you, and oppressive angels that would want to injure you. And there's the 7 Rakiyas one has to go through, and for the next world, and each one of them has guards on them. And if they'll be checked as they're going up, one's neshama. And if there's okay, in other words, if they guarded these gates and did not participate in these activities and did the right thing, the gates will be opened. If not, they won't be able to go up. And it should be, first of all, everybody should merit to be able to raise themselves up in this world as well as the next world. That's one pasuk I want to talk about. And all of these things we're doing also help maintain peace in the world. The next verse I would like to go on here is the verse 20 in chapter 16, which says, Sedek v'sedek torut, Lamond hi Yeresha et haaretz asher yalecha naten lacha. Excuse me. Righteousness you'll pursue, that you will live and possess the land that Hashem your God gives you. Now, as explained by the Ramban and his students, what that is talking about is first of all, there's 2 types of tzedek. One explanation that's given, that we have to pursue it, that the first tzedek is the Shekhinah, the Hashem's presence that we merit. And the second one is Yesod. What is it talking about? It's talking about that, in other words, we'll be crowned with salvation, and in other words, will be like a crown on a head, a kova, a hat, and that will only work if there is emes, and we speak emes. And how can you have emes? The only way you can have emes is ein emes ela shalom. In other words, you must have because only together you can only have true emes if there's justice, because if there isn't, there'll be satisfaction, and they go together. That's one explanation. The other one, another explanation on a deeper level, is that is the first meaning of tzedek is the land of Israel, Eretz Israel, because it's land representing tzedek, justice, and only people in the nation as whole can only be there with tzedek. And part of that is, why does the first one is, in other words, there has to be fear of Hashem, and we need to have proper din, proper justice to do that. And another explanation is the first tzedek is the Shekhinah above Hashem. In other words, once we have to judge as a judge expects, we do justice as Hashem does justice. And if we do that, all will be good. And that is what the whole world is based on. And that is another meaning. Now, in addition to the, as I said, the basic meaning, now yet another meaning. Now the next pasuk I would like to explore is that of Yud Zayin, pasuk 8. Ki yaflei mimach devar lishpat bein dam ledam, bein din ledin, bein nega lenega, divrei ribis b'sherecha, rabbi sherecha, kaman eleha el makom, asher bechar ad Hashem alechecha bo. If a matter of judgment is hidden view between blood and blood, in other words, you can't judge in judgment between verdict and verdict, between saras, spiritual diseases, and which are also matters of caused by speaking evil, as we talked about in the other pasuk. Matters of dispute in your city, you shall rise up and ascend to the place Hashem God has chosen. So why does that have to be done? Because without that, there is going to be increasing mock locus. And as is explained, and this is a very important comparison that we make, and we see between how, and this is Rosh Hashanah Poli, how the difference between us and the nation. And it says in the Torah in Vayikra that Shifkat el Damo, the Kiso Ba'afar, if you slaughter chickens or animals or wild animals, their blood must be covered. And unfortunately, the nations of the world fail to do that. And he then goes on to give other comparisons of how you destroy trees, destroyed our crops. And he then goes on to give another comparison where he explains that the inyan between Hashem to the kingdoms of the earth, in other words, the earthly kings, if it's hidden, and in other words, we hide this, we do not go up to the courts, we do not fairly administer justice, and what's going to happen, it says, Bein dam l'dam, when it says, why that the dam of the oath was covered, but the dam of Israel in the Korban, based on Migdash time and destruction temple, our blood was not covered by the nations. Bein din l'din, between judgment to judgment, Lord. Then also, was hidden from the children, our sons. In the base of Migdash, they killed us and our children. Bein nega basis Shalmaman. On Al-Maman, they took away our, we had the base, they took away our money, Shil Israel. And then there was one where they didn't take away our money, they punished us, but destroyed us. First of all, they destroyed us. And why? Because Bishu who calls Mishum Divrei Ribot, Bishareka, Mishum Mumranuslan, Ain't Shalom Israel, there was no peace. And therefore, since there was no peace and there was constant machloket, the nations were allowed to attack us and destroy us, and that's why we've been in exile. But even though we're now starting to come back to the land, for something close to 2,000 years, 1,900 and some odd years. In any event, may we, as we're coming to the month of Elul, which will actually be the Rosh Hashanah, is Thursday and Friday, may we examine our gates and guard our gates so that we will raise ourselves to the level we should be at, and we may all merit as a nation to reach out to each other and start the healing process and try to get rid of disputes and to resolve things peacefully. Good Shabbos and Shabbat Shalom.